My cousin forged my grandfather's will. But the expert proved it. The lawyer's words hit me like a physical blow. I'm sorry, but according to your grandfather's will, the farm goes to Marcus. I stared at the mahogany desk, my hands trembling as I processed what I'd just heard. The Riverside County Law Office suddenly felt suffocating, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows doing nothing to warm the ice spreading through my chest. That's impossible, I whispered, then louder, that's impossible. Grandpa Joe promised me that farm my entire life. He told me just last month before my voice cracked. Before he passed. Mr. Henley, the family attorney who'd handled Grandpa's affairs for 20 years, shifted uncomfortably in his leather chair. I understand this comes as a shock, but the will is quite clear. Dated March 15th, just 3 weeks ago. Your grandfather left the 240-acre property and farmhouse to Marcus Williams, citing his status as the responsible family member with a wife and children to support. The room started spinning. Marcus, my cousin who hadn't visited Grandpa Joe in over 2 years. Marcus who'd rolled his eyes whenever the old man talked about crop rotations and water rights at family dinners. Marcus who'd openly called farming a dying profession for people too stubborn to move on. Can I see it? I managed to ask. Henley slid the document across his desk. My grandfather's familiar signature stared back at me from the bottom of the page, but something felt wrong. The whole thing felt wrong. I'd been living in the farmhouse's converted garage apartment for the past 3 years while finishing my master's degree in agricultural science at UC Riverside. Every evening, Grandpa Joe and I would sit on the wraparound porch, and he'd talk about his plans to officially transfer the property to me. You're the one who understands this land, he'd say, gesturing toward the orange groves that had been in our family since 1952. You're the one who'll keep it alive. The will was dated March 15th, a Tuesday. I remembered that day clearly because I'd driven Grandpa to his doctor's appointment that morning. Dr. Peterson had been concerned about his mobility after the hip surgery, but Grandpa's mind was sharp as ever. We'd spent the afternoon reviewing soil samples I'd collected for my thesis research. Was Marcus here that day? I asked. March 15th. Henley consulted his appointment book. According to my records, your grandfather came in alone around 2:30 p.m. Said he needed to make some urgent changes to his estate planning. That was impossible. At 2:30 p.m. on March 15th, I was helping Grandpa Joe back to his bedroom for his afternoon rest. The man could barely walk 50 feet without his oxygen tank. There was no way he'd driven the 12 miles to downtown Riverside by himself. Mr. Henley, I said carefully, I think there's been a mistake. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't a mistake. The sick feeling in my stomach told me exactly what this was. Marcus had somehow manipulated this situation, taken advantage of a grieving family's chaos in the weeks following the funeral. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin. Hey, heard about the will reading today. Hope there are no hard feelings. We should talk about your living situation. No hard feelings. Like he hadn't just stolen my grandfather's legacy. Like he hadn't just ripped away the only home I'd known since my parents died when I was 14. I stood up from Henley's office chair, the forged will still clutched in my shaking hands, and made a decision that would change everything. The drive back to the farm felt like a funeral procession. Every familiar landmark, the old Sinclair gas station, the roadside stand where Mrs. Chin sold strawberries, the rusty mailbox that marked our property line, now felt like I was seeing them for the last time. I pulled into the gravel driveway and sat in my Honda Civic for 10 minutes, staring at the farmhouse where Grandpa Joe had raised me after the car accident took my parents. The 2-story Victorian needed paint, and the front steps sagged slightly, but it was home. The converted garage apartment where I'd been living had been Grandpa's workshop for 40 years before he'd helped me transform it into a cozy studio. We'll make it official when you graduate, he promised just 6 weeks ago, tapping the side of his nose like he always did when sharing a secret. Got to keep the tax man happy, but this land is yours, kiddo. Always has been. My phone rang as I finally worked up the courage to get out of the car. Mom's sister, Aunt Linda. Sweetie, I just heard from Marcus about the will, her voice was carefully neutral. I had no idea your grandfather had changed his mind about the inheritance. Changed his mind. Like this was some natural evolution of thought instead of outright theft. He didn't change his mind, Aunt Linda. Something's not right here. A pause. Honey, I know you're upset, but Marcus showed me a copy. It's definitely your grandfather's signature. And honestly, maybe this is for the best. You're still so young, and a farm is a huge responsibility. Marcus has experience with real estate, and little Emma and Jake need stability. I hung up. Marcus had clearly been making his rounds, controlling the narrative before I could even process what had happened. By tomorrow, the whole family would be convinced that poor, irresponsible graduate student me was just having a tantrum about not getting my expected inheritance. Inside the farmhouse, everything felt different. The living room where Grandpa and I had watched Giants games suddenly felt like a museum I was no longer allowed to touch. I walked to his bedroom, our bedroom, really, since I'd moved in there during his final weeks to help with his medication schedule and physical therapy. That's when I found it. Tucked inside his bedside copy of The Grapes of Wrath was a folded piece of paper. My heart stopped as I recognized Grandpa Joe's careful handwriting. Asterisk, testament notes, for Emma, my granddaughter. Farm goes to Emma Williams, UC Riverside student. She understands the land, has the education. Marcus gets the $50,000 savings account instead. Set up meeting with Henley for mid-April after Emma's spring break. Remember, Emma gets mineral rights too, very important, asterisk. The paper was dated March 10th, 5 days before the supposed will was signed. At the bottom, in Grandpa's shakier evening handwriting, he'd added, asterisk, told Marcus about decision today. He seemed upset. Maybe I should have waited until closer to graduation. Asterisk. My hands were trembling so hard I could barely hold the paper. Marcus had known. He'd known that Grandpa intended to leave me the farm, and somehow, between March 10th and March 15th, he'd managed to forge a new will. But I had proof now. Evidence that Grandpa's real intentions were completely different from what that fraudulent document claimed. I took photos of the handwritten notes with my phone, then carefully placed the original back in the book. Marcus might be manipulative, but he just made a critical error. He'd underestimated how well I actually knew my grandfather. I spent the next 3 hours combing through every drawer, every book, every file folder in Grandpa Joe's house, looking for more evidence. What I found made my blood run cold. In his desk drawer, underneath a stack of seed catalogs, I discovered his appointment calendar. March 15th had a single entry written in his careful script, 2 p.m., nap. Emma picking up prescriptions. Below that, someone had scribbled in different ink, cancelled, will appointment with Henley. The handwriting for the cancellation wasn't Grandpa's. The letters were too angular, too hurried. I'd seen that writing before, on birthday cards and grocery lists at family gatherings. It was Marcus's handwriting. My phone buzzed with another text from my cousin, talk to Aunt Linda. I know you're upset, but fighting this won't change anything. The will is legal. I can give you until the end of the month to find new housing. End of the month. 12 days to pack up 28 years of memories and leave the only home I'd ever known. I called Mr. Henley's office, but his secretary said he'd left for a long weekend in Palm Springs. He can see you first thing Monday morning if you'd like to schedule an appointment, she offered. Monday was 4 days away. For days while Marcus consolidated his story and turned more family members against me. That evening, I drove to my best friend Sarah's apartment in Riverside. She took one look at my face and opened a bottle of wine without saying a word. He forged it, I said, showing her the photos of Grandpa's handwritten notes. Marcus actually forged my grandfather's will. Sarah studied the images on my phone, her expression growing more serious. Emma, this is huge. This isn't just about inheritance, this is fraud. Like, go to prison level fraud. I know. But how do I prove it? Everyone's going to say I'm just a bitter granddaughter who got cut out of the will. Sarah was quiet for a moment, then pulled out her laptop. My brother Jake worked for that big law firm in LA, remember? Before he moved to Portland. He told me about these forensic document experts who can analyze handwriting, ink, paper, all sorts of things. They testify in court cases. She was already typing, pulling up websites and professional directories. Look at this, Dr. Patricia Vance, certified forensic document examiner. She's in Newport Beach, about an hour from here. Says she's testified in over 200 cases involving questioned documents. I leaned over her shoulder, reading the testimonials. Bank fraud cases, insurance disputes, contested wills. Dr. Vance had a PhD in chemistry and specialized certifications in handwriting analysis and ink dating. Her consultation fee is $500, I said, my heart sinking. Plus $200 per hour for analysis. I've got maybe $800 in my checking account. What about your emergency fund? That's the $800. Graduate student stipends didn't leave much room for forensic experts. Sarah grabbed her purse and pulled out her credit card. I've got $2,000 credit limit left on this. We're doing this. Sarah, I can't let you. Yes, you can. Emma, your grandfather raised you. You spent 3 years taking care of him. You've been living and breathing that farm since you were 14 years old. If Marcus thinks he can steal it with some forged paperwork, he's got another thing coming. I started crying then, partly from relief, partly from the overwhelming weight of what we were about to undertake. Challenging the will meant accusing Marcus of a felony. It meant potentially destroying relationships with aunts, uncles, and cousins who were already siding with him. But it also meant fighting for Grandpa Joe's real wishes. Fighting for the farm that represented everything he'd worked for, everything he'd taught me about perseverance and nurturing the land. Call her, Sarah said, handing me her phone. Dr. Vance's website says she offers emergency consultations for time-sensitive cases. I dialed the number, my hands shaking as it rang. Dr. Vance. My name is Emma Williams, and I think my cousin forged my grandfather's will. Dr. Vance's voice was crisp and professional, even at 8:30 on a Friday evening. Ms. Williams, forgery cases involving estate documents are unfortunately more common than people realize. Can you tell me when the will was supposedly executed and when your grandfather passed away? I explained the timeline, Grandpa Joe's death on March 28th, the will dated March 15th, and the reading just that afternoon. Dar. Vance asked pointed questions about his physical condition, his usual routines, and whether I had access to the original document. The attorney has the original, I said. But I saw it today. Something felt off about the signature, and I found handwritten notes in my grandfather's belongings that completely contradict what the will says. Handwritten notes are excellent comparative samples, she said. However, I need to be direct about something. Forensic document examination isn't cheap, and contested will cases can drag on for months. Are you prepared for that financial and emotional commitment? My stomach dropped. How much are we talking about? Initial analysis runs $1,500 to $3,000, depending on complexity. If we find evidence of forgery and you decide to pursue legal action, you're looking at additional testimony fees, court time, and legal costs that could easily reach $10,000 to $15,000 total. Sarah squeezed my hand and nodded firmly. She heard every word on speaker. Dr. Vance, that farm is worth $2.8 million, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. My grandfather promised it to me my entire life. If there's even a chance to prove Marcus forged that will, I have to try. Understood. I can see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. if you can bring the handwriting samples. But Ms. Williams, I need you to understand something else. If I determine the will is genuine, you're out the consultation fee with no recourse. And if I do find evidence of forgery, you're accusing a family member of a Class C felony that carries up to 4 years in prison. 4 years in prison. I thought about Marcus's 2 young kids, about his wife Jennifer who'd always been kind to me at family gatherings. But then I thought about Grandpa Joe's careful handwriting, Emma understands the land. I'll be there at 9 a.m., I said. After I hung up, Sarah and I sat in silence for several minutes. The weight of what I was about to do felt enormous. You know there's no going back after this, right? Sarah said gently. Even if you prove Marcus forged the will, your family relationships are going to be permanently damaged. I thought about Aunt Linda's phone call earlier, how quickly she'd accepted Marcus's version of events. About the text messages from other cousins that had been flooding my phone all evening, some supportive, but most echoing the same sentiment. Maybe Marcus is better equipped to handle such a big responsibility. My phone buzzed with another message, this time from Marcus's wife Jennifer. Emma, I'm so sorry about how this all worked out. Marcus feels terrible that you're upset. Maybe we can work something out where you could stay in the garage apartment for a while longer. We don't want you to feel homeless. The condescending tone made my decision crystal clear. They were already planning how to manage me, how to make me grateful for scraps of my own inheritance. I texted back, thanks, but I won't be needing an extended stay. I'm handling the situation. Then I turned to Sarah. Can you drive me to Newport Beach tomorrow morning? I don't trust myself behind the wheel right now. Already cleared my Saturday, she said. We're going to nail this bastard. As I tried to sleep that night in what might be my last weeks in a farmhouse, I could swear I heard Grandpa Joe's voice carried on the wind through the orange groves. Fight for what's right, kiddo. Don't let them take what doesn't belong to them. Dr. Patricia Vance's office in Newport Beach looked more like a high-end medical practice than what I'd expected from a forensic expert. Sarah and I sat in the waiting room at 8:45 a.m., surrounded by diplomas, certifications, and framed newspaper articles about famous cases Dr. Vance had worked on. The Malibu $1 Million art forgery, Sarah read from one of the headlines. Jesus, Emma, this woman doesn't mess around. My phone had been buzzing all morning with family drama. At 6:30 a.m., I'd woken up to a group text from Marcus sent to 12 family members. Unfortunately, Emma is having trouble accepting Grandpa Joe's final wishes. She's making wild accusations that are really hurtful during this difficult time. I hope we can all support each other through this grief. 3 cousins had already responded with messages of support for Marcus. Only my cousin David from Sacramento had texted me privately, what's really going on? Marcus's story doesn't sound right. Dr. Vance appeared at 9 a.m. sharp, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and a kind of focused intensity that made me understand why she was successful at exposing frauds. She led us into her office, which looked like a cross between a laboratory and a library, with high-powered magnifiers, specialized cameras, and filing cabinets that probably held the secrets to dozens of criminal cases. Show me what you have, she said, gesturing to the manila folder where I'd carefully placed photos of Grandpa's handwritten notes. I spread out the images on her desk, explaining the timeline again. Dr. Vance studied the photos through a magnifying glass, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. These are good comparative samples, she said finally. The handwriting appears consistent with what I'd expect from someone with arthritis. Notice the careful letter formation and slight tremor patterns. Now, about the questioned will. Your family attorney has the original. Yes, but he's out of town until Monday. Is there any way to start the analysis without it? Dr. Vance leaned back in her chair. Ms. Williams, I'm going to be honest with you about something. Yesterday evening, after our phone call, I received a very interesting call from a Mr. Marcus Williams. My blood turned to ice. What did he say? He claimed to be your cousin and said he was concerned about your mental state following your grandfather's death. He suggested that you were having difficulty accepting reality and might try to waste my time with conspiracy theories about forged documents. Sarah's hand clenched into a fist. That manipulative piece of. The thing is, Dr. Vance continued, in my 23 years doing this work, I've learned that when someone calls to preemptively discredit a potential client, it usually means they have something to hide. Innocent people don't typically try to interfere with forensic examinations. Relief flooded through me so quickly I felt dizzy. So you'll still help us? I'll do more than that. Mr. Marcus Williams made a critical error by contacting me. He's now created a documented pattern of attempting to control the narrative around this will, first with your family members, now with expert witnesses. That's consciousness of guilt behavior. She opened a file cabinet and pulled out a legal form. I'm going to do something I rarely do for new clients. I'm going to start a preliminary investigation pro bono, contingent on receiving the original document for analysis. If I find evidence of forgery, you pay my standard fees from your eventual settlement. If the will turns out to be genuine, you only owe the basic consultation fee. Why would you do that? I asked. Dr. Vance's expression hardened. Because I've seen too many families destroyed by forged wills, and I've never had someone stupid enough to call me directly and essentially confess their guilt. Your cousin just made this personal. She handed me a business card for a law firm in Los Angeles. Patricia Chen, no relation to your strawberry stand Mrs. Chen, I assume, specializes in contested estates. I've worked with her on 15 cases. She wins. My phone rang as we were wrapping up. Mr. Henley's office. Ms. Williams. This is Janet from Mr. Henley's office. I have some concerning news. We attempted to retrieve your grandfather's will from our document safe this morning for copying, but it appears to be missing. Mr. Henley is driving back from Palm Springs immediately. The room started spinning. Missing? How does a will just go missing? We're not sure. The safe wasn't broken into, but several estate documents are unaccounted for. Mr. Henley wants to meet with you first thing Monday morning. After I hung up, Dr. Vance was already reaching for her phone. This just became a criminal matter. Someone with access to that law office took the will, probably to prevent forensic analysis. She dialed a number. Detective Morrison. Patricia Vance. I need to report a suspected document theft related to an active forgery investigation. As Dr. Vance spoke with the detective, explaining the situation in precise legal terms, Sarah grabbed my arm. Emma, she whispered, Marcus is panicking. He's making mistakes. She was right. Yesterday, Marcus had seemed confident, almost smug. But his call to Dr. Vance and now the mysteriously missing will suggested someone who was desperately trying to cover his tracks. My phone buzzed with yet another text from Marcus. Hey, heard there was some mix-up with the legal documents. Don't worry, I'm sure Henley's office will sort it out. No need for you to get lawyers involved or anything crazy like that. I showed the text to Dr. Vance, who photographed it immediately. Ms. Williams, she said, your cousin is about to find out what happens when you try to outsmart a forensic document examiner. Detective Morrison arrived at Dr. Vance's office within 45 minutes, and I could tell immediately that this wasn't his first rodeo with inheritance fraud. He was a compact man in his early 40s with a kind of steady demeanor that probably came from years of dealing with family members who'd lie to your face about stealing from their own relatives. MS. Williams, I'm going to need you to walk me through this timeline one more time, he said, pulling out a digital recorder. And I want every detail about your cousin's behavior since your grandfather's death. As I recounted the story again, Detective Morrison took notes that went far beyond what I'd expected. He asked about Marcus's financial situation, his access to the farmhouse during Grandpa's final weeks, and whether I'd noticed any unusual visitors or phone calls. Actually, I said, remembering something that hadn't seemed important before, there was something weird about 2 weeks before Grandpa died. I came home from campus around lunchtime and found Marcus in the house. He said he'd been visiting, but Grandpa was asleep and didn't even know he'd been there. Dr. Vance and Detective Morrison exchanged a look. Was your cousin alone? Morrison asked. Yeah, but he was coming out of Grandpa's office when I walked in. Said he was looking for a phone charger, but... I paused, the memory crystallizing. But he was holding some papers. When I asked what they were, he got defensive and said they were just old bills he was helping organize. March 3rd, Detective Morrison said, checking his notes. 12 days before the supposed will signing. Dr. Vance, what's the typical time frame for someone to practice forging a signature? Depends on the complexity, but for an elderly person's handwriting with arthritis tremors, I'd estimate 10 to 14 days of regular practice to achieve something passable. My stomach dropped. Marcus had been planning this for weeks, maybe months. While I was helping Grandpa with physical therapy and medication schedules, my cousin was studying his handwriting and plotting to steal our family's legacy. Detective Morrison's radio crackled, and he stepped aside to answer it. When he came back, his expression was grim. That was my partner at Henley's office. The security footage from March 15th shows Marcus Williams entering the building at 1:47 p.m. and leaving at 2:23 p.m. He signed in as a visitor for your grandfather. But Grandpa was at home sleeping, I said. I have photos on my phone from that afternoon. Show me. I scrolled through my camera roll and found them, timestamps at 2:18 p.m. and 2:31 p.m., showing Grandpa Joe napping in his bedroom, his oxygen tank beside the bed, completely unaware that someone was forging his will 12 miles away. Dr. Vance leaned forward. Detective, this is enough for a search warrant, isn't it? If Marcus practiced the signature, there might be evidence at his residence. Already working on it. But I want to try something first. Morrison turned to me. Would you be willing to call your cousin while I record the conversation? Sometimes when people think they're in control, they say more than they should. My hands were shaking as I dialed Marcus's number. Sarah squeezed my shoulder for support while Dr. Vance adjusted the recording equipment. Emma. Marcus's voice was overly cheerful when he answered. I was just thinking about you. Listen, I talked to a contractor friend about fixing up the garage apartment. Maybe we could make it a more permanent arrangement, you know. Family should stick together. That's nice of you, Marcus, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But I've been wondering about something. Do you remember March 15th? The day Grandpa supposedly signed the new will. A pause. Not really, why? It's just strange because I have pictures of him sleeping at home that afternoon. Around the same time Mr. Henley says he was in the law office. The silence stretched for 10 long seconds. Emma, grief can be really confusing. Sometimes our memories of those final weeks get mixed up. Maybe you're thinking of a different day. Detective Morrison was scribbling notes furiously, underlining something multiple times. Maybe, I said. It's just that I found some handwritten notes in his bedroom. Plans about the will that are completely different from what you inherited. Handwritten notes. Marcus's voice got sharper. What kind of notes? Emma, you shouldn't be going through his private papers. That could be seen as tampering with estate documents. Dr. Vance raised her eyebrows and pointed at the recorder, mouthing, consciousness of guilt. I haven't tampered with anything, I said. But Marcus, if there's something you want to tell me about March 15th, now would be a good time. Another long pause. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had changed completely, harder, more calculated. Emma, I don't know what game you think you're playing, but you need to accept reality. Grandpa Joe left me that farm because he knew I could handle the responsibility. If you keep pushing this conspiracy theory, you're going to embarrass yourself and hurt the whole family. Detective Morrison nodded and gestured for me to keep going. The whole family, I repeated. Including your kids. Marcus, do Emma and Jake know their daddy might go to prison for forgery? The line went dead. Detective Morrison smiled grimly as he stopped the recording. Ms. Williams, your cousin just gave us enough probable cause for that search warrant. The search warrant was executed at 6:30 a.m. the next morning. Detective Morrison called to give me the update while I sat in the farmhouse kitchen, drinking coffee and staring out at the orange groves that might not be mine much longer. We found a jackpot, Morrison said, his voice tight with satisfaction. Your cousin had practiced sheets hidden in his home office, dozens of attempts at forging your grandfather's signature. Different pens, different paper, like he was experimenting to get it right. My coffee cup clattered against the saucer. Practice sheets. That's not all. We found a copy of your grandfather's real will, dated February 28th, leaving everything to you just like you said. Marcus had the original in a file folder labeled Backup Documents. And Emma? We found bank records showing he owes $47,000 to creditors. His construction business is hemorrhaging money. The financial motive made everything click into place. Marcus hadn't just been greedy, he'd been desperate. The farm wasn't about family responsibility or stability for his kids. It was about a $2.8 million solution to his financial problems. There's more, Morrison continued. We seized his computer and found internet searches from early March, how long to probate a will in California, handwriting analysis forensic detection, and statute of limitations estate fraud. This guy researched everything except how to not get caught. I almost laughed despite everything. Marcus's arrogance had always been his weakness, even when we were kids. He'd cheat at board games and then get indignant when anyone questioned his sudden winning streaks. What happens now? I asked. District Attorney's office is filing charges this afternoon. Forgery in the first degree, theft by deception, and identity fraud. With the dollar amount involved, he's looking at 4 to 6 years in state prison. My phone started buzzing immediately after I hung up with Morrison. The family grapevine was apparently faster than official police channels. First Aunt Linda, then 3 cousins, all with variations of the same message. This had to be some kind of misunderstanding. Emma, honey, Marcus is a good father, Aunt Linda's voicemail pleaded. Whatever evidence you think you have, maybe you misunderstood something. Can't we work this out as a family? But it was the text from Marcus's wife Jennifer that hit hardest. How could you do this to the kids? They're asking why Daddy got arrested. Emma and Jake are 6 and 8 years old. Was your stupid farm worth destroying their lives? I stared at that message for 20 minutes, my chest tight with guilt and anger in equal measure. Jennifer was right, those kids didn't deserve to have their world shattered. But Marcus had made that choice when he decided to forge a dying man's signature. I wasn't the one who'd prioritized money over family. Sarah found me crying on the porch steps when she arrived with groceries and moral support. He used his kids as human shields, she said after reading Jennifer's text. That's manipulation 101, Em. You didn't arrest Marcus, he arrested himself the moment he decided to commit fraud. Dr. Vance called around noon with an update that should have felt like victory but somehow just made me more exhausted. The DA's office officially requested my analysis for the prosecution case, she said. I've examined the original will that police recovered from Marcus's house, your grandfather's real will from February. Emma, the signature analysis confirms everything we suspected. The March 15th document was forged using a slow, deliberate tracing technique. Marcus literally traced over photocopies of your grandfather's signature until he could reproduce it freehand. How long until this goes to trial? I asked. That depends on whether he pleads guilty. His attorney might advise him to take a plea deal to minimize prison time. But Emma, there's something else you need to prepare for. Even with Marcus facing criminal charges, some family members are going to blame you for not handling this privately. She was right. By evening, I'd received calls from 4 relatives asking why I couldn't have just worked something out with Marcus instead of involving police. Uncle Robert actually suggested that maybe Grandpa Joe had changed his mind about leaving me the farm and I was too stubborn to accept it. The most painful call came from my cousin David in Sacramento, the one family member who'd initially supported me. Emma, I believe Marcus forged the will, he said. But did it have to go this far? Jennifer's talking about divorce now. The kids are going to grow up with their father in prison. Maybe there was another way. What other way? I asked, genuinely wanting to understand. Let him keep a $2.8 million farm he stole. Pretend Grandpa Joe didn't spend 3 years telling me it would be mine someday. I don't know. Maybe split it somehow. Work out a compromise. But there was no compromise with fraud. Marcus hadn't made a mistake or misunderstood something. He deliberately forged legal documents and stolen my inheritance. The practice sheets proved premeditation. The hidden reel will prove he'd known exactly what he was doing. That night, I walked through the orange groves one more time, breathing in the familiar scent of citrus blossoms and fertile soil. Tomorrow, I'd start the legal process of reclaiming the farm. But tonight, I needed to say goodbye to the person I'd been before learning that family members could look you in the eye and steal your future without blinking. Grandpa Joe's voice seemed to whisper through the trees, sometimes doing right means standing alone, kiddo. But you're never really alone when you're fighting for truth. The arraignment was scheduled for Thursday morning, but Marcus's attorney called an emergency meeting for Tuesday afternoon. Patricia Chen, the estate lawyer Dr. Vance had recommended, sat beside me in the downtown courthouse conference room as we waited to hear what Marcus's legal team wanted to discuss. They're going to try to make a deal, Patricia warned me, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. Probably offer partial restitution in exchange for you asking the DA to reduce charges. Don't let them guilt-trip you. At exactly 2 p.m., Marcus walked in with his attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Richard Kozlov who'd apparently handled several high-profile white-collar cases. Marcus looked terrible. He'd lost weight, his usually perfect hair was disheveled, and he couldn't meet my eyes. Ms. Williams, Kozlov began, my client wants to acknowledge that mistakes were made regarding your grandfather's estate planning. Mistakes? Patricia's voice could have cut glass. Your client forged legal documents and committed identity fraud. Those aren't mistakes, they're felonies. Marcus finally looked at me, his expression a mixture of desperation and resentment. Emma, I never meant for it to go this far. I was drowning financially, and when Grandpa Joe told me about his decision to leave you the farm, I panicked. So you decided to steal it, I said flatly. I was going to pay you back eventually. Once I got the construction business profitable again, we could have worked out some kind of partnership arrangement. You would have gotten your fair share. Kozlov shot his client a warning look, but Marcus kept talking. The farm was just sitting there, Emma. You don't know anything about running a real business. I thought maybe this was Grandpa's way of making sure the property didn't get wasted on someone who'd never make it profitable. Patricia was scribbling notes furiously. Every word out of Marcus's mouth was strengthening our case. Mr. Williams, she said, are you admitting that you knowingly forged your grandfather's will with the intent to defraud my client? Kozlov grabbed Marcus's arm. Don't answer that. But the damage was done. Marcus had just confessed in front of witnesses. Here's our offer, Kozlov said, clearly trying to salvage the situation. Mr. Williams will surrender all claims to the property immediately. He'll pay $25,000 in damages for the emotional distress and legal fees this situation has caused. In exchange, Ms. Williams agrees to support a plea agreement for probation instead of prison time. I stared at him in disbelief. $25,000. He tried to steal a $2.8 million farm. My client doesn't have $2.8 million, Ms. Williams. He's facing bankruptcy. This offer represents everything he can liquidate from his current assets. Patricia leaned forward. What about the house? The construction equipment? Your client's retirement accounts? All leveraged or committed to existing creditors. The $25,000 comes from liquidating his wife's jewelry and their children's college funds. The room went silent. Marcus was so broke that he was stealing from his own kids' futures to try to buy his way out of prison. I need to think about this, I said finally. Emma, Marcus said, his voice cracking, I know I screwed up. But if I go to prison, Jennifer's going to lose the house. The kids will have to change schools, move in with her parents in Arizona. Emma and Jake will grow up knowing their father is a convicted felon. Is that really what you want? Before I could answer, Patricia stood up. This meeting is over. Mr. Kozlov, if your client contacts my client again outside of official legal proceedings, we'll add harassment charges to the criminal case. As we walked out of the courthouse, my phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer, please. I'm begging you. Think about the children. But I kept thinking about something else Marcus had said, the farm was just sitting there. Like Grandpa Joe's life's work, the land that had sustained our family for 70 years, was just some idle asset waiting to be monetized by someone smarter than me. That evening, I made my decision. I called Patricia Chin at 7 a.m. the next morning. I'm rejecting Marcus's plea offer. Emma, are you sure? $25,000 isn't nothing, and there's always a risk with jury trials. I'm sure. But I want to add something to our civil case. I want to sue Marcus for the emotional distress and the cost of Grandpa Joe's care that I provided while Marcus was planning this whole scheme. Patricia was quiet for a moment. That's actually brilliant. We can document every hour you spent as his caregiver, every medical appointment, every night you slept in his room during the final weeks. While you were selflessly caring for your grandfather, Marcus was literally practicing forging his signature. By 10 a.m., Marcus's attorney was calling Patricia back, panic evident in his voice. The civil suit for caregiver compensation and emotional damages could potentially reach 6 figures, even if Marcus had no way to pay it. It would follow him for decades, garnishing wages and preventing him from rebuilding financially. But the real bombshell came at 2:30 p.m., when Detective Morrison called with news that changed everything. Emma, we've been analyzing Marcus's computer files more thoroughly. We found something big. Your cousin wasn't working alone. My blood went cold. What do you mean? Email correspondence between Marcus and someone named Janet Reeves from February through March. They were planning this together. Janet works at Henley's law office, she's the secretary who called you about the missing will. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Janet had been Grandpa Joe's contact at the law office for over a decade. She'd sent him birthday cards, asked about his health during appointments, even attended his funeral. I remembered her tearful condolences at the service, he was such a wonderful man. We're going to miss him terribly. How deep does this go? I asked Morrison. Janet provided Marcus with copies of your grandfather's real will and signature samples. She also gave him access to the office on March 15th using her security code. The plan was for her to discover the original will missing after a few weeks, making forensic analysis impossible. But why would she risk her career for Marcus? Morrison's voice was grim. Financial records show Marcus paid her $15,000 in February. Janet Reeves has been embezzling from client accounts for 18 months. She needed money to cover the missing funds before the annual audit. The scope of the conspiracy made me dizzy. This wasn't just Marcus getting desperate about his construction business, it was a calculated scheme involving identity theft, document forgery, and embezzlement from multiple clients. There's more, Morrison continued. We found communications suggesting they were planning to target other elderly clients. Your grandfather wasn't their first victim, Emma. He was their test case. I had to sit down. Janet had been in the room during Grandpa Joe's previous appointments, listening to him discuss his assets, his family relationships, his plans for the farm. She'd been gathering intelligence while posing as a caring family friend. How many other families did they steal from? I asked. We're investigating at least 3 other questionable wills from the past year. Elderly clients who supposedly changed their minds about beneficiaries shortly before death, all with Janet as the witness coordinator. Patricia Chin arrived at my house within an hour, her expression a mixture of shock and professional excitement. Emma, this case just became massive. We're not just talking about your inheritance anymore, we're talking about a systematic fraud operation targeting vulnerable elderly clients. My phone started ringing immediately as news of Janet's arrest spread through the legal community. Other attorneys, potential victims' families, and reporters who'd gotten wind of what was being called the Riverside will forgery ring. But the call that mattered most came at 6 p.m. from Jennifer, Marcus's wife. Her voice was hollow, defeated. I didn't know, she said simply. Emma, I swear on my children's lives, I had no idea what Marcus was planning. When the police showed me the practice sheets, the emails with Janet, I threw up. I literally threw up. For the first time since this nightmare began, I actually believed someone from Marcus's side of the family. Jennifer, I never wanted to hurt you or the kids. No, she interrupted. You did the right thing. If you hadn't fought this, Marcus and Janet would have kept stealing from other families. Other people would have lost their grandparents' legacies. She paused, and I could hear her crying softly. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow, Emma. And I'm going to testify against Marcus if this goes to trial. The DA's office called me at 8:30 a.m. Friday morning with news that made my coffee go cold. Ms. Williams, we need to discuss something urgent, Assistant District Attorney Rebecca Martinez said. Marcus's case just got more complicated. His attorney is claiming that Janet Reeves coerced him into the forgery scheme. I nearly dropped the phone. What do you mean, coerced? They're arguing that Janet approached Marcus with insider information about your grandfather's assets and threatened to fabricate evidence of financial impropriety unless he cooperated. Essentially, they're painting Marcus as another victim. Patricia Chin was already shaking her head when I called her with the update. Classic defense strategy, she said. Blame the co-conspirator who can't defend herself as effectively. But Emma, there's something else. Janet's attorney just filed a motion claiming she has evidence that your grandfather was suffering from dementia during his final months. My stomach dropped. That's impossible. Dr. Peterson evaluated his cognitive function every month. Grandpa was sharp as a tack until the day he died. I know, but if they can cast doubt on his mental capacity, it complicates everything. They could argue that any will he made during that period should be questioned, including the real February will that leaves you the farm. This was exactly what Dr. Vance had warned me about. Once you start challenging wills, everything becomes fair game for scrutiny. Even proving Marcus committed forgery might not be enough if they could convince a jury that Grandpa Joe wasn't competent to make estate decisions at all. Detective Morrison arrived at the farm that afternoon with a thick folder of documents and a grim expression. Emma, Janet's defense team is playing hardball. They've subpoenaed your grandfather's medical records, pharmacy records, even his library checkout history to build a case for diminished capacity. His library checkout history? Looking for patterns that might suggest confusion or memory problems. But here's what's interesting, we found something in Janet's office that her lawyers don't know about yet. He opened the folder and pulled out photocopied pages. Janet kept detailed notes on potential targets. Look at this entry about your grandfather from January 15th. I read the handwritten notes in Janet's neat script, * Joseph Williams, sharp, alert, no cognitive issues observed. Discusses complex agricultural contracts with full understanding. Asset value approximately $3.2 million. Primary beneficiary granddaughter Emma, graduate student, financially vulnerable, unlikely to afford legal challenge. Window of opportunity, 6 to 8 weeks given current health decline, *. The calculated coldness of it made me sick. Janet had been evaluating my grandfather like a predator sizing up prey, even noting that my graduate student income made me an unlikely threat to their scheme. There's more, Morrison continued, flipping pages. She has similar profiles on 5 other elderly clients, including detailed assessments of their mental acuity and family dynamics. This completely destroys her dementia claim. But the most chilling discovery was on the final page, notes dated March 20th, 5 days after the forged will, *J.W, asking questions about March 15th timeline. May need contingency plan if granddaughter pursues investigation. Marcus getting nervous, consider limiting his involvement going forward, *. Patricia leaned forward as she read. Janet was already planning to throw Marcus under the bus if you challenged the will. This was never a partnership, she was using him as expendable muscle. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, stop digging or you'll regret it. Some secrets should stay buried. Detective Morrison immediately photographed the message and started making calls to trace the number. Either Janet or Marcus is getting desperate, he said. Threatening a witness is a separate felony charge. Within 2 hours, the number was traced to a prepaid phone purchased with cash at a convenience store in Marcus's neighborhood. Security footage showed a woman matching Janet's description buying the phone on Thursday evening, the same day her attorney filed the dementia motion. She's unraveling, Patricia observed. First-time criminals often panic when they realize how much evidence prosecutors can gather. Janet's probably facing 12 to 15 years in federal prison, and that's if she cooperates. But as I sat in the farmhouse that evening, surrounded by legal documents and evidence of my family's betrayal, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still missing something important. Janet's notes were too detailed, too professional. Her targeting system was too sophisticated for someone who just started embezzling 18 months ago. Dr. Vance called at 9 p.m. with a theory that made my blood run cold. Emma, I've been thinking about the timeline inconsistencies. Janet's been at that law office for 8 years, but the embezzlement only started 18 months ago according to police. What if the will forgery scheme has been running much longer than we thought? She was right. Janet had access to hundreds of elderly clients' files over nearly a decade. How many other families had lost their inheritances to forged documents? How many people had accepted suspicious will changes because they couldn't afford to fight them? Tomorrow, we're going to request a comprehensive audit of every will Janet processed in the last 5 years, Dr. Vance said. Emma, your grandfather might not have been their test case. He might have been their biggest score in an operation that's been stealing from families for years. As I hung up, I realized that exposing Marcus's forgery had uncovered something far more sinister than family betrayal. We'd stumbled onto a criminal enterprise that had been systematically targeting the most vulnerable members of our community. And based on that threatening text, they weren't planning to go quietly. The comprehensive audit results arrived on Tuesday morning, delivered by Detective Morrison with the kind of expression that told me our suspicions had been devastatingly confirmed. Emma, sit down, he said, spreading files across my kitchen table. We found 11 other suspicious wills processed by Janet Reeves over the past 4 years. 11 families who lost inheritances to sudden, last-minute changes that benefited distant relatives or family members with financial problems. My hands shook as I looked through the case summaries. Margaret Chin, 82, farm property worth $1.6 million suddenly left to a nephew instead of her devoted daughter. Robert Martinez, 78, $890,000 estate redirected from his granddaughter to a cousin who'd been struggling with gambling debts. The pattern was sickeningly familiar, elderly clients with substantial assets, loving family members expecting inheritances, and desperate relatives with access and motive. 11 families, I whispered. How much money total? Approximately $14 million stolen over 4 years. And Emma, that's just what we can prove so far. Janet's computer files suggest they were researching at least 6 more potential targets for this year. Patricia Chin arrived within the hour, her expression mixing professional outrage with genuine sadness. I've been contacted by attorneys representing 3 of the affected families. They're all asking the same question, how do we prove their loved ones didn't actually change their minds? The legal complexity was staggering. Unlike my grandfather's case, where we had his handwritten notes contradicting the forged will, most of these families had no evidence of their relatives' true intentions. Janet and her accomplices had been careful to target people whose real wishes weren't documented anywhere. But there's something else, Morrison continued, pulling out a manila envelope. We found Janet's insurance policy, detailed recordings of phone conversations with elderly clients. She was documenting their mental competence to protect herself if anyone questioned the wills later. He played a recording dated 6 months ago. An elderly man's voice, clear and articulate, discussing his estate plans. I want everything to go to my daughter Susan. She's taken care of me for 15 years while my son David hasn't visited once. Susan deserves this farm. 3 weeks later, according to the files, that same man supposedly signed a will leaving everything to David. Patricia was taking notes furiously. These recordings are going to destroy any dementia claims Janet's attorney tries to make. But Emma, we have a bigger problem. The FBI is taking over this case. My stomach dropped. Why is that a problem? Federal mail fraud, wire fraud, racketeering charges, this is now a multi-state investigation. Your individual case might get delayed for months while they build the broader conspiracy case. The timing couldn't be worse. I was already living day to day in the farmhouse, never knowing when Marcus's legal claims might force me out despite the criminal charges. My graduate program required thesis completion by December, but how could I focus on soil chemistry when my entire future was trapped in federal court proceedings? Detective Morrison's radio crackled with an urgent message. After a brief conversation, he turned back to us with news that changed everything again. Janet Reeves was found dead in her cell this morning. Apparent suicide, bedsheet news, discovered during routine check at 6:30 a.m. The room went silent except for the ticking of Grandpa Joe's old clock on the mantel. Janet's death meant losing our primary witness, our source of information about the broader conspiracy, and potentially our ability to help the other victimized families. But it also meant something else. Someone who knew she was facing decades in federal prison had chosen to take her secrets with her rather than cooperate with investigators. Patricia closed her files slowly. Emma, Janet's death just made your case simultaneously easier and much more dangerous. Easier because Marcus loses his co-conspirator defense. More dangerous because whoever else was involved in this operation just learned that exposure means life imprisonment. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number, one down. Stop digging or join her. This time, Detective Morrison didn't wait to trace the number. He was already calling for a protective detail and federal marshals. The person threatening me wasn't Marcus or Janet, it was someone higher up the conspiracy chain, someone we hadn't identified yet. The FBI field office in downtown Los Angeles felt like a different planet from the quiet farmhouse where this nightmare had begun. Special Agent Catherine Brooks, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, led me through a maze of cubicles to a conference room that looked like something from a crime thriller, whiteboards covered in photos, timeline charts, and financial flow diagrams that made my head spin. Ms. Williams, Janet Reeves' death has accelerated our investigation significantly, Agent Brooks said, gesturing to a chair across from two other federal agents. We need to discuss something that might be difficult to hear about your family's case. Patricia squeezed my hand reassuringly as Agent Brooks opened a thick file folder. Janet wasn't the mastermind behind this operation. She was middle management. Brooks spread out bank records and email printouts. Over the past 18 months, she transferred $340,000 to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. That money was then redistributed to at least 4 other law offices across Southern California. My blood ran cold. 4 other law offices. All handling estate planning for elderly clients. All showing the same suspicious pattern of last-minute will changes benefiting financially desperate relatives. Agent Brooks pointed to a map on the whiteboard marked with red pins. We're looking at a coordinated fraud network spanning 3 counties, possibly generating $20 to $30 million annually. Detective Morrison had been quiet until now, but he leaned forward with a grim expression. Emma, we traced that threatening text message. The phone was purchased by someone using Marcus's construction company credit card, but the purchase was made while Marcus was in custody. What does that mean? I asked, though the sick feeling in my stomach already suggested the answer. Someone else has access to his business accounts. Someone who knows about your investigation and sees you as a threat to their entire operation. Agent Brooks pulled out a photograph that made my heart stop. Do you recognize this man? The photo showed a silver-haired man in an expensive suit shaking hands with Janet Reeves outside the courthouse. It took me a moment to place him, but when I did, the betrayal hit like a freight train. That's Richard Kozlov, I whispered. Marcus's attorney. Patricia's face went white. The attorney who knew exactly what evidence we had before we presented it. Who suggested that specific plea deal amount? Who had access to Marcus's business accounts for legal fees? Agent Brooks nodded grimly. Richard Kozlov has represented clients in 7 of the suspicious cases we've identified. He's not just defending people caught in this scheme, he's recruiting them. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Kozlov had been identifying desperate clients with legal problems, then connecting them with Janet's network to target wealthy elderly relatives. He provided legal cover for the forgeries while taking a percentage of every successful theft. How long has this been going on? I asked. Based on financial records, approximately 8 years. Kozlov started small, helping a few clients manipulate inheritances through legitimate legal loopholes. But as his gambling debts increased, he needed bigger scores and faster turnarounds. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Agent Brooks gestured for me to answer while they activated recording equipment. Emma Williams. The voice was smooth, professional, with just a hint of menace. This is Richard Kozlov. I think we need to have a private conversation about your grandfather's situation. I'm listening, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. You've stumbled into something much larger than a family dispute. There are powerful people with significant investments at stake. Walk away now, accept a generous settlement, and everyone stays safe. Keep digging, and you'll discover that accidents happen to people who threaten established business relationships. Agent Brooks was scribbling notes furiously, signaling me to keep him talking. What kind of settlement? I asked. Kozlov's laugh was cold. 500,000 cash, plus you keep the farm. All charges against Marcus disappear. Everyone wins. And if I refuse? Then you'll learn why Janet chose to end things quietly rather than face what happens to people who expose this operation. The line went dead, but Agent Brooks was already smiling. Emma, Richard Kozlov just confessed to racketeering, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to commit fraud on a recorded federal line. We've got him. The federal marshals arrived at the farm within 2 hours of Kozlov's threatening phone call, transforming my peaceful orange groves into something resembling a crime scene. Agent Brooks explained that they'd been tracking Kozlov's movements since Janet's death, and his desperation was making him sloppy. We intercepted communications between Kozlov and associates in Phoenix and San Diego, she said, adjusting her bulletproof vest as we sat in my kitchen surrounded by armed agents. This network is much bigger than we initially thought. They've been operating in Arizona, Nevada, and Northern California as well. Patricia arrived with a box of documents that made my head spin. Emma, the good news is that Kozlov's threat actually strengthens our case tremendously. The bad news is that we've identified at least 23 families who've been victimized by this network over the past 8 years. 23 families. I thought about all those people who'd grieved their loved ones while simultaneously losing their inheritances, probably assuming their elderly relatives had simply changed their minds about family relationships. How many people had accepted these fraudulent wills because they couldn't afford to investigate? My phone rang with a call from Marcus, who was apparently allowed one supervised call from federal custody. His voice was shaky, desperate. Emma, I swear I didn't know how deep this went. Kozlov approached me last February when I missed 3 payments on the construction loans. He said he knew a way to help me avoid bankruptcy, that it was just paperwork manipulation, nothing that would really hurt anyone. Nothing that would hurt anyone. I couldn't keep the anger out of my voice. You tried to steal Grandpa Joe's farm, Marcus. I know. But Kozlov said you'd never actually lose anything because the plan was to set up a family partnership. You'd get to keep living there and receive income from the property, but I'd handle the business decisions and debt obligations. Agent Brooks was listening intently, recording everything. She gestured for me to keep him talking. When did you realize it wasn't just about our family's situation? I asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. About 2 weeks ago, when the FBI showed me files from other cases. Emma, there was an 85-year-old woman in Pasadena whose granddaughter lost a $2 million house because of a forged will. The granddaughter had been caring for her grandmother for 6 years, and suddenly everything went to some cousin who needed money for his restaurant business. The parallel to my own situation was nauseating. Did you know Janet was recording Grandpa Joe's conversations? Not until after she died and they found her files. Emma, there are hours of recordings of him talking about how proud he was of your graduate work, how excited he was to see you take over the farm operations. She recorded him specifically talking about leaving me the savings account but keeping the land in your name. Agent Brooks leaned forward. Marcus, this is Agent Brooks with the FBI. Can you tell us about other clients Kozlov mentioned during your meetings with him? There was a family in Riverside he was working with, something about a grandfather with Alzheimer's who owned a restaurant chain. And he mentioned a case in Orange County involving some kind of medical practice inheritance. But I swear, I thought I was the only one stupid enough to get involved in something like this. After the call ended, Agent Brooks showed me a map covered in colored pins representing confirmed cases across Southern California. The scope was breathtaking and heartbreaking, dozens of families systematically robbed of their inheritances by people who'd identified their financial vulnerabilities and exploited them. Emma, your decision to fight Marcus's forged will has uncovered the largest inheritance fraud scheme in California history, Agent Brooks said. The total financial impact is approaching $50 million. Patricia was already drafting paperwork for a class action lawsuit representing all the victimized families. With Kozlov's recorded confession and the evidence from Janet's files, we can help these families recover their stolen inheritances. But Emma, this is going to take years to fully resolve. As federal agents secured the farmhouse for the night, I walked through Grandpa Joe's orange groves one more time, thinking about how this had all started with my simple desire to honor his wishes. Now, somehow, that fight had exposed a criminal network that had been destroying families across multiple states. The farm was finally, legally mine again. But the cost of reclaiming it had revealed just how many other families were still fighting battles they didn't even know they'd lost. 6 months after Kozlov's arrest, I thought the worst was behind us. The farm was legally mine, Marcus was serving 18 months in minimum security prison, and the FBI had dismantled what they called the largest inheritance fraud network in West Coast history. I was finally able to focus on finishing my graduate thesis on sustainable citrus farming. Then Agent Brooks called with news that made my coffee go cold. Emma, we have a problem. Richard Kozlov is claiming he has information about additional crimes that could reduce his sentence significantly. He wants to make a deal. I sat down hard in Grandpa Joe's old kitchen chair. What kind of additional crimes? He's alleging that some of the elderly victims weren't just defrauded, that several deaths were suspicious. He's claiming Janet Reeves and her associates may have accelerated timelines when clients started asking too many questions about their estate planning. My hands started shaking. You mean they killed people? We don't know yet. But Kozlov has provided specific names and dates that we have to investigate. Emma, 3 of the elderly victims died within 2 weeks of signing the suspicious wills. The families assumed it was just tragic timing, but if Kozlov is telling the truth, the implications hit me like a physical blow. Mrs. Margaret Chen, whose family I'd met during the class action lawsuit proceedings, had died just 8 days after supposedly leaving her farm to a gambling-addicted nephew. Robert Martinez had passed away 11 days after his sudden will change. The families had been too devastated by grief to question the timing. What does this mean for our case? I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. Agent Brooks sighed heavily. It means the federal investigation is expanding into potential homicides. Your civil cases are going to be delayed indefinitely while we determine if we're dealing with fraud, murder, or both. Patricia arrived at the farm within an hour, looking more shaken than I'd ever seen her. Emma, if Kozlov's allegations are true, this changes everything. We're not just talking about forged documents anymore, we could be looking at a criminal organization that murdered elderly clients to prevent discovery. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer, Marcus's ex-wife. Emma, the FBI just questioned me about whether Marcus ever mentioned anyone being hurt. What's happening? The kids are asking why federal agents came to their school. The expanding investigation was traumatizing families all over again, forcing them to relive their grief while wondering if their loved ones had been murdered for their assets. I thought about Mrs. Chen's daughter, who'd spent months blaming herself for not visiting her mother more frequently before her death. Now she had to consider whether her mother might have been killed for asking questions about the will change. Dr. Vance called that evening with technical analysis that made my stomach churn. Emma, the FBI asked me to examine the timeline data from all the suspicious cases. The pattern is disturbing. In every case where the victim died shortly after signing, there are gaps in the usual documentation process. No follow-up appointments scheduled, no copies mailed to family members, no attorney consultations about implementation. What does that suggest? That these wills were created specifically as deathbed documents. The perpetrators knew these clients wouldn't be alive long enough to reconsider or discuss the changes with family members. Agent Brooks called again at 9 p.m. with an update that confirmed my worst fears. Emma, we've started exhuming bodies for toxicology analysis. The preliminary results from Margaret Chin show elevated levels of potassium chloride, a substance that can cause heart failure in elderly patients with existing cardiac conditions. I had to sit down. Sweet Mrs. Chen, who'd sent Christmas cards to everyone in her family and baked cookies for her postal carrier, had been murdered by people who saw her as nothing more than a $1.6 million opportunity. How many others? I whispered. We're testing 5 more cases this week. Emma, I need you to understand something. If these deaths were intentional, Kozlov's cooperation could be essential for getting justice for these families. The DA is considering offering him a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony. The thought of Kozlov benefiting from revealing murders he'd helped orchestrate made me sick. But if his information could help convict the people who'd actually killed innocent elderly victims, maybe it was worth swallowing that bitter pill. My phone rang with a call from David, my cousin in Sacramento. His voice was tight with worry. Emma, there's something I never told you about the weekend before Grandpa Joe died. Marcus came to visit me, and he was acting really strange. He kept asking weird questions about Grandpa's medication schedule and whether you were monitoring everything he took. The room started spinning. What kind of questions? Like whether you counted his pills every day, whether his doctors would notice if he missed doses. I thought he was just worried about Grandpa's health, but now. David's voice trailed off. Now you think he might have been planning something else, I finished. The possibility that someone had tried to harm Grandpa Joe made rage burn in my chest like nothing I'd ever felt before. But it also raised a terrifying question. If the network had been willing to kill other elderly victims, why had they let my grandfather die naturally? Agent Brooks would want to hear about David's conversation immediately. But first, I needed to call Dr. Peterson and ask about Grandpa Joe's final medical records. Because suddenly, I wasn't sure his natural death had been natural at all. The call from Dr. Peterson came at 6:23 a.m., waking me from the first solid sleep I'd had in weeks. His voice was shaken in a way I'd never heard before. Emma, I've reviewed your grandfather's final blood work from March 26th, the tests we ran 2 days before he passed. There are anomalies I missed at the time, but given the FBI's investigation. He paused. I found traces of digoxin in concentrations that don't match his prescribed dosage. My coffee cup slipped from my hands, shattering on the kitchen floor. What does that mean? Digoxin is a heart medication. Your grandfather wasn't prescribed it, but someone with access to cardiac drugs could have administered it to cause heart failure. Emma, I think someone tried to kill your grandfather too. Agent Brooks arrived within 30 minutes, her face grim as she listened to Dr. Peterson's technical explanation over speakerphone. The toxicology evidence, combined with David's testimony about Marcus's suspicious questions, painted a horrifying picture. Here's what we think happened, Brooks said, spreading out a timeline on my kitchen table. Marcus was supposed to accelerate your grandfather's death after the forged will was signed on March 15th. But something went wrong, either he couldn't bring himself to do it, or you were monitoring your grandfather too closely. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Marcus's frequent visits during Grandpa's final weeks, his questions about medication schedules, his nervous behavior that I'd attributed to grief. He'd been working up the courage to murder the man who'd raised me. So they had to wait for natural death, I said, which gave me time to find the handwritten notes and start investigating. Patricia arrived as Agent Brooks was explaining Kozlov's plea negotiations. Emma, there's been a major development. Kozlov's attorney just called. He's ready to testify about the entire operation, including the attempted murder plans, in exchange for a 25-year sentence instead of life without parole. 25 years still meant Kozlov would likely die in prison, but it also meant families could finally get answers about their loved ones' deaths. More importantly, it meant the other members of the network, the people who'd actually administered the fatal doses, could be prosecuted for murder. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, sent through his attorney. Emma, I need you to know I couldn't go through with hurting Grandpa Joe. When it came down to it, I just couldn't do it. That doesn't excuse the will forgery, but I want you to know I'm not a killer. Agent Brooks photographed the message immediately. This is actually helpful. Marcus's refusal to follow through with the murder plan supports Kozlov's testimony about the network's methods. Over the next 3 weeks, the investigation reached its stunning conclusion. Kozlov's cooperation led to arrests of 4 other attorneys, 6 law office employees, and 2 people who'd posed as home health aides to gain access to elderly victims. The final tally was staggering: 43 forged wills, 11 confirmed murders, and approximately $68 million in stolen inheritances. The day Kozlov was sentenced, I sat in the federal courthouse surrounded by families of victims. When Judge Martinez announced the 25-year sentence, Mrs. Chen's daughter squeezed my hand and whispered, "Thank you for fighting. Mother can rest in peace now." But the moment that meant the most came that evening, back at the farm. Patricia called with news that the last civil case had been settled. Emma, every family has recovered their stolen inheritance. The network's assets, Kozlov's properties, everything has been liquidated and returned. As I hung up, I walked out to Grandpa Joe's orange groves, breathing in the familiar scent of citrus blossoms. The farm was mine, legally and finally. More importantly, 42 other families had reclaimed their loved ones' legacies too. My phone displayed a message from the Chin family. "Your grandfather would be proud. You saved all of us." Standing among the trees that had anchored our family for 70 years, I could almost hear Grandpa Joe's voice on the evening breeze. "You did good, kiddo. You fought for what was right." The expert had proved it, all right. But more than that, we'd proved that sometimes one person's refusal to accept injustice can expose evil that destroys dozens of lives. The farm was finally, truly mine. And every family that got their inheritance back made the fight worth every sleepless night.